Rain hammered the cracked windshield like it held a grudge. Jack Miller eased his grip on the steering wheel and leaned forward, squinting past the sweep of the wipers. The heater in the old Ford pickup wheezed out air that smelled faintly of burnt dust and oil, just warm enough to fog the bottom edge of the glass. Outside I-75 was a stretched line of gray under a sky that looked like wet concrete, heavy and low. He checked the dashboard clock again. 7:17 a.m. 13 minutes until his interview at Hart Motors. His thumb tapped an anxious rhythm on the steering wheel. The motion was automatic, the way a smoker reached for a pack that was no longer there. He caught his reflection in the rearview mirror and tugged at his thrift store tie. It sat crooked against the collar of his only decent shirt, a pale blue one that still carried the faint smell of starch from the iron Lily had wrestled with the night before. He tried straightening the knot again. It still looked wrong. Too cheap for the marble floors and glass walls he imagined at Hart Motors. Too honest for that kind of place. Traffic thinned as he left the city behind. The freeway rose slightly, and the world outside narrowed to 2 wet lanes, smeared red taillights ahead and endless gray. Trucks hissed past, throwing sheets of dirty water across his windshield. The wipers squealed in protest. His mind kept sliding to the same picture, a wide conference table, men in suits. A woman from HR with a polite smile. Him sitting there trying to explain why a man who spent most of his life under rusty cars belonged inside a company that shined. Then Lily's face cut through that picture. 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil tucked behind her ear, telling him she would draw him in a manager's shirt after he came back from the interview. She had said it like a promise, or a spell. Jack shifted in his seat. The vinyl sighed under him. He tasted metal in his mouth. Nerves. Up ahead, a smear of hazard lights blinked against the rain. He saw it first as color, a soft, pulsing orange on the shoulder. As he drew closer, the shape sharpened. A black Tesla sat crooked near the guardrail, one wheel sunk into the soft gravel. Steam or mist curled from the hood. The front left tire was shredded rubber hanging in ragged strips around the gleam of the rim. A woman stood beside it, coat pulled tight, her hair stuck damply to her cheeks. One hand held a phone, the other was shoved uselessly into her pocket. Cars screamed past her, spraying her with cold water, pushing her a fraction of an inch backward with every rush of air. Jack's right foot hovered over the accelerator. He saw her shoulders jump with each passing truck. She turned her head toward his lane, eyes wide as if counting the cars that did not slow down. For a second, a pair of headlights lit her face from the side. She looked younger than he expected, though the tailored coat and polished boots said she belonged to a world where people did not wait long for help. 12 minutes until interview. He could drive past. The thought arrived clean and sharp. He could pretend he had not seen the hazards in time. Say traffic had been brutal. Say anything, really. Nobody checked the story of a man who arrived on time and said all the right words. Hart Motors would not miss the woman with the flat tire. Hart Motors would not know he had left her there. The truck behind him blared its horn as Jack's speed bled away. He tightened his jaw and eased his foot back onto the gas. The Ford shuddered, ready to surge forward. The hazard lights flicked again in his peripheral vision, blinking like a held breath. In his head, his father's voice rose up out of nowhere, so clear it might have been sitting in the passenger seat. "You don't leave folks on the side of the road, kid. Not if you can help it. I don't care where you're headed." His father had said that a dozen times when Jack was a teenager riding shotgun in an old tow truck that rattled worse than this pickup. They would stop for strangers in farm trucks and minivans with kids in the back, in summer heat and winter ice. Jack had hated it. Sometimes hated the delay, the cold, the way his father smiled at people who never remembered his name. He had never forgotten the rule. The clock on the dash ticked over to 7:18, 11 minutes now. Jack exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs with a low sound that almost passed for a curse. He slid his foot to the brake. The pickup jerked as he signaled and moved to the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires as he eased to a stop behind the Tesla. The hazard lights reflected on his hood in orange streaks. When he killed the engine, the sudden quiet inside the cab made his ears ring. For a moment, he just sat there. Rain drummed on the roof softer now without the engine noise. His hands stayed tight on the wheel knuckles, white. He could feel his pulse in his fingers. The heater fan ticked as it spun down, letting a draft of cold seep in through the vents. He pictured the lobby of Hart Motors again, but it felt farther away, like a place from someone else's life. "Okay," he muttered more to himself than anyone else. He reached behind the seat and grabbed the red metal toolbox. It was old and scarred, the paint worn away at the corners to bare metal, the handle smooth from years of use. On the side, half peeled and faded, was the original sticker from his father's garage, Miller Auto, the ink so pale you could barely read it. Even after all these years, the metal smelled faintly of grease and the cheap aftershave his father used to wear. Jack popped the driver's door open, and cold air slapped him in the face. The sound of the freeway roared in louder out here, alive and angry. He stepped down boots, landing in a shallow puddle that soaked his socks in 1 second flat. Rain hit his cheeks cold and hard. He squinted against it as he rounded his truck toolbox, banging gently against his leg. The woman turned at the sound. Up close, he saw that her coat was a deep navy, now darkened with water along the sleeves. Her hair, some expensive cut that probably normally fell just right, clung to her forehead in damp strands. Her mascara had smudged slightly under her eyes, not enough to look dramatic, just enough to say this morning had already gone wrong. Relief flashed across her face when she saw him. It softened the set of her mouth and widened her eyes as if some tightly coiled spring inside her had loosened a notch. "Hi," she called over the sound of the rain and traffic. "I'm so sorry I tried calling roadside assistance. They said it would be at least 2 hours." Her voice carried that smoothness he associated with people who worked indoors, people who talked for a living. There was a hint of city in it, something polished under the frayed edges of panic. Jack gave a small nod, squinting down at the ruined tire. Rubber hung in strips from the rim, torn so badly it looked like someone had attacked it with a knife. "Looks like you hit something nasty," he said. "You got a spare?" She blinked, then seemed to remember herself. "Yes, in the back, I think. They said it came with one." She moved toward the trunk, shoes slipping a little in the wet gravel. Jack followed, setting the toolbox down with a familiar clank. His fingers were already cold, but they moved with practiced ease as he popped open the back and found the hidden compartment. The spare sat there, never touched. He lifted it out and set it beside the shredded tire. The rain had eased to a mist, but the air still bit at his ears and nose. Cars whipped by, sending gusts of wind across his back. "Name's Jack," he said as he knelt, reaching for the lug wrench. "Jack Miller." There was a tiny pause. "Eve," she answered. "Eve Johnson." He noted the hesitation without thinking too much about it. People often hesitated when they were scared on the side of a highway. Names did not always come first in a situation like that. The lug nuts fought him, at first rusted, slightly tightened hard. He leaned into the wrench muscles, remembering thousands of similar motions. His jeans soaked at the knees, cold water seeping through the fabric, but the discomfort slid into the background. This was familiar. This made sense. Metal weight leveraged the small, satisfying crack when a nut finally loosened. Somewhere behind the noise of traffic and rain, the clock on the dashboard of his truck kept counting. By the time the last lug nut loosened, Jack could not feel his fingers. Water had soaked through his shirt and crawled down his spine. His knuckles were slick with a mix of rain and old grease, and every breath carried the cold smell of wet asphalt and rubber. The roar of traffic became a constant wall of sound at his back. He eased the ruined tire off the studs and rolled it aside. The edges of the shredded rubber scraped against the gravel. The spare was lighter, unused, its tread still sharp. He lifted it into place and guided the holes over the studs with the kind of care other people reserved for crystal glasses. Eve hovered nearby, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Every so often she glanced toward the stream of cars, as if checking that the world was still moving while her morning had stalled. "You do this a lot?" she asked, raising her voice over a passing semi. Jack set the spare on fully, then lifted the lug nuts into place one by one. "Feels like it," he said. "Started helping my dad before I was tall enough to see over the hood." He braced the wrench and tightened the nuts in a star pattern. Metal squeaked and complained, then settled. He rocked the tire once, testing it before lowering the car back onto the ground. Eve watched his hands more than his face, her eyes following each motion with a kind of focused curiosity. "Your dad was a mechanic," she said. "Owned a little place in town," Jack answered. "Nothing fancy. 2 bays old coffee machine and the corner radio that only played country no matter what station you picked." He tried to smile at the memory. For a brief moment, he could smell that shop again, oil and coffee and the peculiar sweetness of hand cleaner. Then the image faded, swallowed by the hiss of tires on wet pavement. He gave the lug wrench a final test tug and straightened up. His knees protested stiff from the cold and the hard ground. Water dripped from the hem of his jacket. "All right," he said. "You are good to go." Eve let out a breath he had not realized she was holding. Her shoulders dropped a little, and the tight line around her mouth eased. "Thank you," she said. "Really, I was starting to imagine being out here until lunch." She reached into her coat, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and flipped it open. The bills she thumbed free looked too crisp for this stretch of highway. Jack lifted a hand. "You do not have to," he said. "It is the least I can do," she insisted. "You stopped. You are soaked. You probably ruined your morning." He shook his head, water flying from the brim of his hair. "This took 20 minutes, he said. "I have lost more time than that trying to get a rusted muffler off a '96 Chevy." Her mouth twitched. The joke landed, but the worry did not disappear from her eyes. She held the money out between them, the bills softening in the damp air. "It would make me feel better," she said. He looked at the money. It was enough to cover a week of groceries if he stretched things, enough to make one of the smaller bills look less threatening on the kitchen table. His father's words rose again, quiet but solid. Jack closed her hand around the bills instead. "If you really want to pay me back," he said, "do it for someone else. Next time you see a person on the side of the road or anywhere and you can help you stop, that will square us." Something flickered across her face at that. A small crack in the polished expression, a hint of confusion and something like respect. She studied him, searching for a hint of performance, maybe some sign that he was angling for something else. "Okay," she said softly. "Pass it forward. That is the idea." She tucked the wallet away, then hesitated, her gaze dropping to his tie. It hung at a crooked angle, darker now from absorbed rain clinging to his shirt. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He shrugged. "Sure." "You are dressed up," she said. "At least more than most people I see changing tires. Were you heading somewhere important?" He glanced toward his truck. The dash clock glowed faintly through the window, the numbers blurred by raindrops. "Interview," he said. "Hart Motors, management position." The words tasted faintly ridiculous in his mouth, now standing there with his knees wet and his hands blackened. It felt like talking about a movie he had almost seen. Her eyes sharpened. "Hart Motors," she repeated. "That big plant near Dayton. That is the one." "And you are late because of this?" she said. He followed her gaze to the destroyed tire, then back to the freeway. A new wave of cars shot by, each one carrying someone on their own schedule, their own idea of what mattered. "Looks that way," he said. For a second, something passed over her features, a shadow of thought heavier than simple guilt over an inconvenience. She pressed her lips together, then let them part again as if she had changed her mind about saying something. "Maybe they will understand," she said quietly. Jack snorted, not unkindly. "Big companies are not exactly known for that," he said. He stepped back from the car and wiped his hands on an old rag from his pocket. The grease smeared more than it lifted. He would need to hit the sink hard when he got home if the plumbing cooperated. Eve opened the driver's door and slid behind the wheel. She rolled down the window halfway, the motor humming smoothly, the interior warm and almost absurdly clean. "Thank you, Jack," she said. "I owe you." "You do not," he said. "Just remember the next person stuck on the shoulder." She nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. "When you get wherever you are going," she added, "I hope it goes your way." He did not trust his voice for a second, so he just tipped 2 fingers in a small salute and stepped back. The Tesla eased forward, then merged into traffic, its taillights shrinking in the rain. He watched until the car vanished in the blur of spray, then turned toward his truck. By the time he dropped into the driver's seat, the cold had worked its way through his clothes into his bones. He shoved the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine coughed twice before shaking the whole cab. The clock on the dash read 7:41. He sat there for a long moment, hands on the wheel staring at the glowing numbers. The interview had started at 7:30. They would be halfway through their list of questions by now, maybe already talking about the next candidate. He let out a slow breath, then put the truck in gear. On the drive back toward town, the rain began to thin. The sky stayed low and gray, but the drops softened into a mist that clung to the fields along the freeway. The billboard for Hart Motors slid by on his right, the company logo bright against the dull clouds. Beneath it, a smiling worker in a crisp uniform held a wrench that looked brand new. Jack glanced at the sign only once. He took the exit 2 miles earlier than planned, the one that led not to the industrial park, but toward the patchwork of small streets where the trailer park sat. The closer he got, the quieter the roads became. The roar of the freeway faded behind him, replaced by the occasional bark of a dog and the rattle of an old sedan crossing a pothole. The trailer park spread out on a slight rise, rows of metal homes in varying states of fatigue. Some had little porches built onto them, some had sagging steps, most had toys or bicycles scattered outside. A few stubborn flowers pushed up through the damp soil and plastic planters. He pulled up beside his own place, a pale unit with a patched section near the roof, and a small rectangle of yard he and Lily had tried to turn into a garden. In the muddy strip of earth, a few green shoots poked through, beaded with rain. Jack cut the engine. Silence rolled in heavy, broken only by the light patter of leftover drops from the trees overhead. He sat for another breath, then grabbed the toolbox and stepped out. Inside, the air was warmer, scented with cheap coffee and the faint sweetness of cereal. The television hummed quietly in the corner, some morning cartoon running on low volume. The whole place could have fit inside the lobby of Hart Motors 3 times over, but it held everything he had. Lily sat at the small table by the kitchen window, a bowl of cereal in front of her. Her dark hair was pulled into 2 uneven braids that she had probably done herself, and her backpack lay open on the seat beside her, paper spilling out in a soft drift. She looked up when he closed the door. He saw the way her eyes scanned him. Wet jacket, tie askew, no folder in his hand, no new expression on his face. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Hey, kiddo," he said, draping his jacket over the back of a chair. "Hey," she echoed. She set the spoon down with a small clink. That sound felt louder than the television. "How did it go?" she asked. Her voice was careful light, like she was trying to make the question sound casual. Her eyes were not casual. They were steady and older than they should have been, watching his face for cracks. He pulled the tie loose and set it on the table. A wet spot from his jacket sleeve spread slowly across the cheap wood surface. He could say he impressed them. He could say they would call. He could build a little false bridge across the next few hours until she got distracted by school, by friends, by homework. The lie sat on his tongue ready. He thought of her drawing last night, the one where she had sketched him in a pressed shirt, standing under a sign that said Hart Motors in big block letters. She had written manager in careful uneven capitals above his head. He also thought of her mother the way she used to look at him when he tried to soften bad news. It had never worked on her either. "I missed it," Jack said. Lily blinked once. "You missed it," she repeated. "There was a car on the side of E75, he said. Flat tire. Nobody was stopping. I did. By the time I finished, it was too late." He tried to keep his tone simple, matter of fact. No drama, just sequence. Lily looked at him for a long second. He saw the flicker of thoughts crossing her face, quick and layered. Worry, confusion, a tiny spark of something like, "Oh, of course. Mom always said you would give away your last dollar to some stranger with a broken car," she said at last. Guess she was right. She did not say it like an accusation. She said it like she was calling a familiar shape by its name. The tension across his shoulders loosened a fraction. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "You mad?" he asked quietly. She shrugged, the motion small. Her spoon made lazy circles in the milk. "I am sad you did not get to go," she said. "I know you wanted it." He swallowed. Something that might have been pride or guilt or both at once rose in his chest. "We will find something," he said. "We always do, right?" She nodded, and this time a real smile touched her mouth, quick and bright. "Yeah," she said. "We do." He walked to the counter and poured himself a mug of coffee, from the pot the liquid dark and a little burnt. He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the heat sink into his skin. Behind him, the spoon began to clink against the bowl again, steady and calm. Rain ticked lightly against the small kitchen window. The gray light outside made the little bulb above the sink seem warmer by comparison, casting a soft circle of yellow over the chipped counter and the worn floor. For now the world had narrowed to this table, this room, the sound of his daughter finishing her breakfast. The next morning started with the smell of rubber and old coffee. Rusty's auto and tire sat on the edge of town, close enough to the freeway that you could hear trucks downshifting when the bay doors were open. The building was squat and square, with a faded sign that had once been a bold red but now leaned toward pink. Inside, the concrete floor was stained with oil in shapes that looked almost intentional, like someone had painted with spills instead of brushes. Jack lay on a creeper under a tired Honda, with a rattling exhaust, his shoulders just clear of the oily puddle beneath the engine. Country music crackled from a small radio on a shelf, the reception fading in and out every time someone walked past. The air in the shop tasted like metal and burned dust. The scent was so familiar that he hardly noticed it most days. It clung to his clothes, his hair, even his skin like a second layer he could never scrub off completely. "Hey, Miller, that muffler gonna fix itself," Rusty shouted from the office. Jack rolled out from under the car, one hand guiding the creeper, the other steadying the wrench. Rusty stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since lost its original color. He was thick through the middle, with a beard that always seemed one day away from being trimmed. "It is getting there," Jack said. "You want to come show it who is boss?" Rusty snorted. "That is why I keep you around, so I do not have to crawl under these things and crack my back in half." He disappeared again, the bell over the office door jingling as he went in. Jack slid back under the Honda, the underside of the car filling his field of vision. He listened for the faint rattle as he tapped the pipe, trying to locate the worst of the trouble. His hands moved almost without conscious thought, fingers tracing along metal tightening clamps, checking hangers. Outside, a set of tires hissed on the wet driveway. The sound was different from the usual old sedans and pickup trucks that came through. Softer, less growl, more hum. He heard footsteps on the concrete, not the heavy, confident stomp of a guy who worked with tools. A different cadence, lighter, careful about the puddles. "Excuse me," a voice called. Jack rolled out, using his heel to push off the bumper. The shop lights cast a pale glow across the floor. He blinked against it as he focused on the figure standing just inside the bay. Eve Johnson stood there, in a knee-length blue dress, a light coat hanging open over it. Her hair was dry and smoothed back now, shining under the fluorescent tubes. She did not look like a woman who had been soaked to the skin on the side of the freeway. She looked like someone who belonged in clean spaces with controlled temperatures. In each hand, she held a paper cup, sleeves around them, printed with the logo of a downtown coffee shop Jack had only ever seen from the outside. For a quick second, his stomach tightened. Heart motors floated to the surface of his mind, then sank again. He pushed the thought aside. "You found the wrong kind of mechanic," he said, pushing himself to his feet and wiping his hands on a rag. "We usually only accept cars, not their owners." Eve smiled, the expression reaching her eyes this time. "I brought peace offerings," she said, lifting the cup slightly, "in case you are still regretting stopping yesterday." He shook his head, but the smell of the coffee drifted across the space between them. It was richer than the burnt pot in the corner of the shop, with a hint of something sweet underneath. "Regret does not go away with caffeine," he said, "but I will not say no to it." She walked carefully around a dark streak on the floor and handed him one of the cups. Her fingers brushed his for a brief instant. Her hand was warm. His felt rough, and he became distinctly aware of the oil that refused to leave the creases in his knuckles. He took a sip. The coffee was strong and smooth, slightly bitter, in a way that felt deliberate, not like the accident in the pot back at the trailer. "That is unfair," he said. "Now my coffee at home is ruined forever." She laughed, and the sound softened the hard edges of the shop for a moment. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "You already tried that," Jack said. "I remember a handful of cash." "And you turned it down," she replied. "So I had to get creative." They moved toward the open bay door, without really deciding to. Outside, the sky was clearer than the day before, patches of pale blue breaking through the cloud cover. The driveway still held small lakes where the rain had collected. Traffic rolled past the shop slower here, the sound of engines blending with the faint wind. "You missed your interview because of me," Eve said after a moment. "I kept thinking about that all day." "You did not make me stop," Jack answered. "I have been pulling over for people on the shoulder since I was 16. Habit is hard to break." "You could have kept driving," she said. "Yeah," he said, "I could have." He did not add anything. The highway, the flashing hazards, the sound of his father's voice in his head, all of it was still close enough that he did not trust himself to pull it apart out loud. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her studying his profile, the lines at the corner of his mouth, the way his jaw set. "You really wanted that job?" she asked. "Wanted a shot at it," he said. "Heart Motors pays more than Rusty. Benefits would not hurt. I would not mind wearing clean shirts for a change." He glanced down at his work shirt. Oil stains had turned the original gray to a patchwork of darker shades. The name patch over his chest, stitched with JA in red thread, had frayed at the edges. "And if they offered it again," she said. He took another sip of coffee. It warmed his chest, spreading out from his stomach. "That is not how it works," he said. "They set a time. You show up or you do not. They move on. Plenty of people more polished than me waiting for a shot." Eve did not argue, but she did not agree either. Her gaze drifted to the open toolbox near the wall sockets and wrenches laid out in a neat order that only made sense to the person who used them. "You fix things," she said. "That is what you do." "On a good day," he said. She was quiet for a beat. Sometimes places need more of that than they think, she said. It hung there between them, light on the surface, heavier underneath. Rusty stuck his head out of the office. "Miller, that Civic owner is getting antsy," he called. "Oh, you got company." His gaze slid to Eve's dress, the coffee cups, the shoes that had never seen a puddle of motor oil. His eyebrows went up. "I am keeping him from his work," Eve said. "I do that all the time," Rusty replied. "I am the boss it is in the job description." He gave Jack a look that said, "We will talk about this later," then retreated to the office again, the bell jingling. Eve turned back to Jack. "I should let you get back under cars," she said. "That is usually where I am happiest," he said. She hesitated, then nodded toward the street. "If say you got a call from Heart Motors," she said, her tone almost casual, "and they wanted to see you again, would you still be interested?" Jack blinked. "That is very specific for a hypothetical," he said. She smiled faintly. I spend my days with hypotheticals, she said. Humor me. He looked past her out to where the road curved away toward the freeway. A truck rolled by, the driver leaning on the wheel with one hand coffee cup in the other. The world did not seem particularly interested in his answers. If they called, he said slowly, and if they somehow forgave a guy who could not make it on time the first try, yeah, I would go. I owe it to Lily to at least try. Eve's shoulders relaxed in a way he might not have noticed if he had not been watching her. Good to know, she said. She stepped backward toward the parking lot. Thank you again, Jack, she added, for yesterday and for the coffee company. Thank you for ruining my taste for cheap coffee, he said. Her smile widened. She crossed the lot to a gray sedan parked near the street. Not the Tesla, something quieter, less noticeable. He watched her drive away, the car merging into traffic until it disappeared beyond the next light. He finished the Civic, then the next car, and the next. The day wore on in small tasks. Brakes belts, a leaking radiator. Each job left its own pattern of grime on his hands. The motion soothed him, even as a small seed of possibility sat somewhere under his ribs, faint and insistent. Near mid-afternoon, the phone on the wall rang. Rusty, who was filling out a work order at the counter, picked it up. Rusty's auto, he said. Yeah, he is here. Who is this? There was a pause. Rusty's expression shifted from bored to puzzled. Hart Motors, he repeated. You serious? He covered the receiver with his palm and called toward the bays. Jack, get in here. Some fancy lady from Hart Motors wants you on the line. Jack wiped his hands on a rag as he walked to the office. His heart picked up speed, a tight, quick beat in his chest. The office smelled like cold coffee and old paper. The desk was cluttered with invoices and parts catalogs. Rusty held the phone out, his eyes curious. Try not to scare them, he said. Jack took the receiver. This is Jack, he said. The voice on the other end was smooth and practiced. Mr. Miller, this is Janet from Human Resources at Hart Motors, the woman said. I hope I am not catching you at a bad time. No, he said. This is fine. I wanted to follow up regarding your interview yesterday, she said. We understand there were some car troubles on your way in. His hand tightened slightly around the phone. He glanced through the office window at the shop, half expecting to see a gray sedan parked outside again. You could say that he replied. These things happen, Janet said. We would like to offer you another opportunity to come in and meet with our team. If you are still interested, of course. He leaned against the desk for balance. The edge pressed into his hip. I am interested, he said. His voice came out steady, though he could feel the rush of adrenaline under his skin. Wonderful, she said. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 9? He ran a quick calculation in his head. Drop Lily at school, drive to the plant. Traffic, if the freeway behaved. Yes, he said. I can make that work. She confirmed the address and details he already knew by heart, then thanked him and hung up. The dial tone buzzed in his ear. Rusty watched him. Well, Rusty asked. They want me to come in tomorrow, Jack said. Rusty grunted. Guess they did not read your file close enough, he said. Good. About time someone else realized you know what you are doing. Jack set the receiver back in its cradle. His hand shook just slightly as he let go. That night, the trailer felt smaller than usual. Lily stood on a chair by the ironing board, tongue caught between her teeth, as she guided the iron over his shirt. The steam rose in soft bursts, carrying the scent of warm fabric. The old board wobbled with each pass. You know I could do that, Jack said from the table. You make everything crooked, she said without looking up. You do cars, I do clothes. He accepted the division of labor without protest. His tie lay on the table in front of him. He picked it up, practiced the knot, slowly pulling the fabric through, adjusting the length. In the reflection of the dark television screen, he saw himself slightly blurred. The man in the glass looked tired, but something in his eyes was brighter than the morning before. Were they mad? Lily asked, moving the iron carefully around a button. About what he said. About yesterday, she said. About you not going. They did not sound mad, he said. They said they wanted to see me. Tomorrow at 9. She paused, then lowered the iron to its stand. So you get another chance, she said. Looks like it, he said. She stepped down from the chair and held the shirt up in front of her, inspecting her work. The fabric was as smooth as it was going to get. She brought it over and laid it on the back of his chair. You will get it, she said with the certainty of someone who had not yet been told how many times life could say no. He smiled, a small private thing. I will do my best, he said. Mom used to say that is all grown-ups can do, she answered. Their best. The rest is just other people being weird. He let out a quiet laugh. You remember everything she said, he told her. Lily shrugged, a little shy now. Some things, she said. They ate dinner at the same small table plates close together, talking about school projects and a kid in her class who had tried to bring a frog inside his jacket. The bigness of tomorrow sat just behind his thoughts, but he did not let it crowd out the sound of her voice. Later, when she had brushed her teeth and fallen asleep with one arm flung across a pile of stuffed animals, Jack stood in the doorway of her room for a moment. The nightlight cast a soft glow across her face, smoothing out the worries she sometimes carried during the day. In the kitchen, his shirt hung from a hook collar, gleaming faintly in the dim light. His shoes sat by the door, wiped as clean as they could get. The red toolbox rested in its usual corner, the old sticker with Miller Auto barely visible waiting. The sky over Dayton looked scrubbed clean the next morning. A thin haze still hung on the horizon, but sunlight pressed through in wide, pale bands, turning the wet pavement into a streaked mirror. Jack's pickup rattled as he took the on-ramp toward the industrial park, the engine doing its best impression of confidence. He wore the blue shirt Lily had ironed, the fabric still holding a faint trace of starch. The knot of his thrift store tie sat neater this time, the muscle memory from years ago finally waking up in his fingers. He had polished his shoes until the scuffs dulled to a suggestion instead of a statement. The red toolbox stayed at home, lined up obediently in its corner. He had paused with his hand on the handle before leaving, then let it go. Walking into Hart Motors with a toolbox felt like wearing work gloves to a wedding. As the freeway curved, the Hart Motors complex rose into view. It sat just beyond the river, a collection of low buildings and one taller structure of glass and steel that caught the morning light. The company logo stood out in clean white letters on a sign flanked by trimmed shrubs. He took the exit marked Hart Industrial Drive, following the flow of cars toward the main entrance. The closer he got, the more new paint and fresh asphalt he saw. The parking lots were neatly lined, the spaces full of sedans and SUVs that still had their shine. He eased the pickup into an empty spot near the back of the lot, far from the glass doors. The truck settled with a soft groan when he cut the engine, as if relieved to be allowed a rest. For a moment, he stayed seated, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, he could see his reflection superimposed over the image of the building, a man in an old truck framed by modern architecture. He drew a breath that felt too big for his lungs, then let it go slowly. "Okay," he said into the quiet cab. He climbed out, locked the door out of habit, and started toward the entrance. Gravel crunched under his soles before giving way to the smoother feel of concrete. The early sun warmed the front of the building. The glass panels reflected the lot behind him, a patchwork of polished cars with his battered pickup sitting like an afterthought. Inside, the lobby felt like another country. Cool air met him first, carrying the subtle scent of something floral and expensive. The floor was a pale stone that clicked gently under his steps. To the right, a wall of glass looked out over a landscaped courtyard with carefully placed trees and a small fountain. To the left, a huge framed photograph showed a row of gleaming vehicles rolling off a production line. Workers in matching shirts smiling as if the moment had been plucked out of a commercial. A reception desk of wood and chrome sat at the center with a woman behind it, whose hair and jacket looked like they belonged in a company brochure. She glanced up and smiled, not the strained kind he had expected, but something warmer. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "Jack Miller," he said. "I have an interview at 9. She typed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Miller," she said after a second. "You are with operations. You are right on time. If you would take a seat, someone from Human Resources will be out in a moment." He nodded and moved to a cluster of chairs near a low table. Magazines fanned across the surface in tidy stacks, all glossy covers and bold headlines. He sat gingerly on the edge of a chair that felt softer than it looked. From here, he could see his reflection in the glass doors again, faint layered over the cars outside. His shirt did not look as out of place as he had feared. His shoes, no matter how polished, still felt like they belonged in a different story. He smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from his knee and forced his hands to stay still. After a few minutes, a woman approached from the hallway. She held a tablet against her chest, and her ID badge bounced gently against it as she walked. Her hair was pulled back, and her smile looked like she had practiced it but not worn it out. "Mr. Miller," she said. He rose. "Yes. I am Janet from Human Resources," she said, offering her hand. "Nice to meet you." Her grip was firm but not testing. He could feel the slight contrast between her soft skin and the roughness of his palm, even though he had scrubbed until his knuckles reddened that morning. "Come with me," she said. "We will be in one of the conference rooms upstairs." They crossed the lobby and stepped into an elevator. The doors closed with a smooth, quiet motion. Soft instrumental music filled the small space, the kind that was designed to sit in the background and never draw attention to itself. Janet glanced at her tablet. "You had some unfortunate car trouble the other day," she said. "I am glad we could get you rescheduled." He thought of rain on his face shredded rubber and a woman named Eve holding out a wallet. "Me too," he said. The elevator opened onto a hallway lined with glass-walled rooms. Inside, people sat at tables, some alone with laptops, others in groups gesturing at charts and screens. The murmur of conversation and the occasional faint laugh floated through the glass as a low hum. Janet led him to a room near the end. On the glass wall beside the door, someone had printed Heart Conference B in neat letters. Inside, a long table sat beneath a row of recessed lights. A screen hung on one wall, blank for now. The far wall was all glass looking down over the parking lot and the curve of the road beyond. A man in a dark suit stood near the table, a folder open in front of him. His hair was just starting to gray at the temples, and there was a crease between his brows that suggested he frowned more often than he smiled. "Tom, this is Jack Miller," Janet said. "Mr. Miller, this is Tom Richards, Director of Operations for Plant 2. Tom reached out as Jack approached. "Jack," he said, "good to meet you." "Nice to meet you," Jack replied. Tom's handshake was firm and brief. His eyes, a light gray, scanned Jack, quickly taking in the tie, the shirt, the way he carried himself. It was not unfriendly, but it was evaluating. Jack became aware then of a third person in the room. She stood near the window, her back to them, looking out over the lot. The light from outside traced the line of her shoulders and the fabric of her suit jacket. Her hair, neatly styled, lay smooth against the collar. At the sound of his voice, she turned. For an instant, the world narrowed to the space between them. The rain-soaked coat was gone. The damp strands of hair stuck to her cheeks were replaced by a clean, controlled style. The smudged mascara had vanished, leaving sharp, clear eyes. The blue dress had become a dark suit that fit her like it had been made just for her. Eve Johnson, standing in a glass conference room high above the ground, looked like an entirely different woman, except for the eyes. Those were the same. Janet stepped slightly to the side. "Mr. Miller," she said, "this is Vivian Hart, our Chief Executive Officer." The name seemed to hang in the air for a second longer than the others. Jack had seen it before on the website, when he had looked up the company late at night. On a frame photo in the lobby, under a caption about leadership and legacy. Up close, the title sat on her shoulders like another piece of clothing, familiar to her but foreign to him. "Hello, Jack," Vivian said. Her voice was calmer than it had been on the shoulder of I-75, steadier, but he recognized the cadence. "Morning," he said. He was aware of his heart beating a little faster, the feel of his shirt collar suddenly tighter against his neck. Tom glanced between them, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face, then settling back into professional neutrality. "Shall we sit?" Tom said. They took seats around the table. Janet positioned herself slightly off to the side, tablet ready. Tom sat across from Jack, hands folded loosely in front of him. Vivian took a seat near the head of the table, angled towards them. From where Jack sat, he could see the parking lot through the glass wall behind her. His pickup was a small, dull spot among the rows of gleaming vehicles. Tom started with the expected questions: work history, time at Rusty's, the types of systems Jack had worked on before. Jack answered as plainly as he could, sticking to what he knew. He talked about diagnosing stubborn problems by ear, about tracking down intermittent faults that did not show up on a computer, about keeping old equipment running long enough to squeeze a few more years of usefulness out of it. Tom listened occasionally, jotting something down on a notepad. Janet typed notes on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. Vivian said little at first. When he glanced her way, he found her eyes on him, attentive, almost searching. There was no trace of highway panic in her gaze now, only a quiet intensity. After a while, Tom leaned back slightly. "Your references from Rusty's are strong," he said. "They speak very highly of your work ethic." "Rusty likes having someone else crawl under the cars," Jack said. "He might be biased." Tom smiled, the crease at his brow easing. "One thing we have to address," Tom continued, "is the missed interview on Monday." There it was. Jack felt his shoulders stiffen, then he made himself breathe out. He had known this was coming. There had not been another way through. He met Tom's eyes for a second, then looked directly at Vivian. "I saw a car on the side of I-75, he said. "Flat tire, bad position. Nobody stopping. I did. By the time I was done, I was late. That is why I did not show." Tom's gaze flickered toward Vivian, just a quick darting glance. Janet paused in her typing, then resumed. Vivian did not look away. "You chose to stop," she said, her voice even. "Yes," Jack said. "You knew it might cost you the interview," she said. "I knew it might," he answered. "I hoped it would not, but I am not great at driving away from someone stuck on the shoulder." There was a brief silence. The faint hum of the air conditioning filled it. Tom cleared his throat. "From our side, it created some logistical issues," Tom said. "Schedules, time, that sort of thing. We have people lined up for these slots." "I understand," Jack said. "If someone does not show you, assume they do not care enough to be here." His words sat there. Janet's lips pressed together for a moment, as if she recognized something in them. Vivian leaned forward slightly. "Do you regret it?" she asked. The question was simple, but something in the way she said it made it land differently. It was not just about the company's schedule. It was about the piece of him that had pulled over. He let the question hang for a beat. "No," he said finally. "I regret missing your time, and I regret making anybody here think I did not take this seriously. But I do not regret stopping." His tone stayed calm. He was not trying to impress them. He was just saying it out loud. Vivian's gaze stayed steady on his. "Even knowing who was waiting on the other end," she asked. He gave a small, humorless smile. "Back then I thought some HR person I had never met was waiting," he said. "Now, I know it was the CEO." Either way, the person with the flat tire was still standing there, in the rain. Janet shifted in her chair, the fabric of her skirt whispering softly. "You have every right to be frustrated with how information was handled," she said carefully. Jack glanced at her, then back at Vivian. "I do have one question," he said. Tom's brows went up a fraction. "What is that?" Vivian asked. He kept his voice level. "If you were already on your way to Hart Motors," he said, "and you knew I was headed there too, why give me a different name on the side of the road?" The room went very quiet. Janet's fingers stilled on the tablet. Tom looked briefly uncomfortable, as if he had not expected the conversation to tilt this direction. Vivian did not look away. "That is fair," she said. Her expression shifted, something in it softening at the edges. Janet cleared her throat. "Perhaps we can take a short break," she suggested. "Give everyone a moment. I can check on the next room schedule." Tom seemed relieved. "Good idea," he said. He stood gathering his folder. Janet rose as well, already tapping something into her tablet. "We will be right outside," she said. They stepped out into the hall, the glass door closing with a soft click behind them. The conference room felt larger once they were gone. The city lay stretched beyond the window, sunlight glinting off parked cars and the distant river. Inside, only the quiet hum of the ventilation and the faint ticking of the wall clock marked the passing moment. Jack sat on one side of the table. Vivian sat on the other, her hands resting lightly on the surface, fingers loosely interlaced. Vivian was the one who broke the silence. She drew in a slow breath, then let her hands separate on the table. The light from the window caught the thin gold band on her right ring finger, bright against her skin. "You are right," she said. "You deserve an answer." Her voice had lost the boardroom polish just a little. There was a rawness underneath, like metal that had been sanded but not buffed yet. "When I took this job," she went on, "everyone around me changed what they called me. People who had known me since I was a kid stopped using my first name. They started saying things like Ms. Hart and Madam Chair. They started telling me what I wanted to hear before I even knew what I thought." She met his eyes. "Most of them want something," she said. "A promotion, a contract, a favor, a quote for a magazine. Some of them are very good at pretending they do not. It gets hard to tell the difference." Jack listened, arms resting on the table. The hum of the air vent filled the spaces between her sentences. "So, when I end up on the side of the freeway with a tire blown out," she said, "soaked through makeup, running, nobody knowing where I am yet, and a stranger pulls over in a truck that sounds like it has seen too many winters, you will have to forgive me for wanting one moment where my name does not enter the equation." "You did not want me to know you were the one with your name on the building," he said. "I wanted to see what kind of person you were when you thought I was nobody," she said. "Whether you would still get out of the truck, whether you would still hand back the money, whether the way you talked about your father was a story or something you actually live by." There was no challenge in the way she said it, just a simple laying out of facts. He let that sit for a second. "I can understand wanting that," he said slowly, "but sitting on this side of the table, it still feels a lot like a test I did not know I was taking." Her mouth pulled in at one corner, a brief rueful motion. "It was not fair," she said. "You are right about that." He studied her face. Up close, the careful makeup could not completely hide the faint shadows under her eyes. The suit fit perfectly, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held them a little too straight. "People lie to you a lot?" he asked. "People edit," she said. "They show me the parts they think I can use. Numbers at their best. Stories with the messy edges cut off. No one brings me the broken thing unless it is already on fire." He thought of the shredded tire on the shoulder of I-75, the way she had gripped her phone like a lifeline, and a useless piece of plastic at the same time. "What about you?" she asked. If I had told you my full name on the side of the road, if I had said I ran Hart Motors while you were kneeling in the gravel, would you have done anything differently? He considered it. The honest answer was the only one he had. I might have been more careful with my mouth, he said. Maybe I would have tried to sound smarter, but I still would have changed the tire. A quiet breath left her, almost like a laugh she did not quite let out. Then at least I know that much, she said. He leaned back slightly in his chair. The tightness in his shoulders had not completely gone, but it was not the same kind of tension as before. What do you want from me, Ms. Hart? He asked. This time she did smile a small flash. Vivian is fine, she said, and what I want right now is to finish this conversation without ruining your chances of getting the job. Before he could respond, there was a quick knock on the glass door. Janet opened it a crack, her usual composure shaken. Behind her, the hallway buzzed, just a touch louder, like a current had run through the floor. Vivian, she said, not bothering with the title. I am sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. It is Plant 2. Line 3 just went down again. Full stop. Tom appeared behind her, already tucking his phone back into his pocket. They are on the phone with maintenance, he said. They have been down 40 minutes. They cannot get pressure back up. They are shutting down upstream because backup capacity is maxed out. The room's atmosphere shifted. The interview fell away. Something colder and sharper moved in. How much are we losing? Vivian asked, already standing. Rough estimate. Tom said a few thousand a minute if they miss the shipping windows they are projecting. That does not count the penalties if we cannot hit the weekly contract. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating without needing a calculator. Is Gene on site? She asked. He is there, Tom said. They have run through the usual suspects. Filters, valves, sensor resets. Nothing is sticking. Janet glanced apologetically at Jack. I am really sorry, she said. We did not expect this to collide with your slot. Jack had barely moved from his chair, but his attention had locked onto the details as soon as the words Plant 2 left Janet's mouth. Hydraulic line, he asked. A pneumatic electronic control issue. Tom looked at him, surprised that he had spoken up. Hydraulic, Tom said. At least that is what they think. Pressure drops as soon as they bring it back online. Jack turned toward Vivian. You said Plant 2, he said. What kind of line is it? Chassis subassembly, Tom answered before she could. High throughput heavy load. Newer equipment, but it has been temperamental since install. Jack nodded once slowly. They checked the primary filters on the hydraulic system. He said more to himself than anyone. You said that. Did anyone mention a secondary housing? Some of the newer systems hide one. Harder to reach, clogs faster under heavy cycles. Tom exchanged a look with Vivian. You know this kind of setup, Tom asked. I know that most machines have a place everyone forgets to look, Jack said. Secondary filters, bypass valves, old software stuck behind a pretty new interface. He stood up then, almost before he realized he had moved. If I could hear it, I might be able to guess where it is choking, he said. Sometimes you can tell by the way the pump whines when it tries to pull fluid through a blocked line. Vivian watched him weighing something. You do not work for us, she said. There was no judgment in it, just a fact. Not yet, he said. But you sit me across from you and ask who I am when it matters. This is who I am when something is broken. Tom looked from one to the other. We have engineers, he said, a whole team on that floor. They are probably very good at keeping new equipment happy, Jack said. Sometimes you need the guy who has spent 20 years sweet-talking junkyard transmissions back to life. The faintest hint of a smile touched Tom's mouth, in spite of the tension. Vivian glanced at the clock on the wall. Less than an hour ago, this room had been about resume questions and polished answers. Now the air felt charged in a completely different way. She made the decision in one clear breath. Janet, reschedule the rest of Jack's interview block, she said. Tom, grab your notes. We are going to Plant 2. Janet nodded and stepped away, already scrolling through her tablet. Vivian looked back at Jack. Are you willing to come along, she asked. No promises, no guarantees, just a ride to a messy situation. Jack's answer was immediate. Yes, he said. He did not add that messy situations were where he felt most at home. They left the conference room together. The hallway outside buzzed with quiet urgency. A couple of people looked up from their screens as the trio passed, their eyes drawn to the CEO, moving at that particular brisk pace that meant something real was happening. In the elevator, the polite instrumental music felt at odds with the sharp lines of Vivian's posture. She tapped a quick message on her phone, then lifted it to her ear. This is Hart, she said. Put me on speaker in the control room at Plant 2. There was a brief scramble on the other end. A click, then the hum of a larger space came through the line. Voices, machines, the echo of a high ceiling. Vivian, this is Gene, a man's voice said. We have line 3 down. We have replaced filters, checked valves, bled the system twice. Every time we bring it up, pressure drops off a cliff. How long since initial failure, she asked. 45 minutes, Jean said. We are about to start shutting adjacent lines, so we do not overload the mains. Jack listened, eyes on the elevator doors. He could picture the scene without being there. The cluster of managers, the flashing alarms, the way workers would be pretending not to stare while knowing exactly how bad the numbers were. Jean, he said before he could stop himself. Have you pulled any secondary filters on the hydraulic reservoir, or just the primaries? There was a pause on the line. Who is that? Jean asked. Jack Miller, Vivian said. He is with me. We have pulled the primaries, Jean said. There is no mention of secondary filters in the quick reference. Check the full spec, Jack said. Some manufacturers tuck a secondary housing behind a panel to keep things clean. It clogs first, especially if the line runs close to capacity a lot. Look for a smaller canister feeding the main bank. Another pause. The faint sound of shuffling paper and muffled voices came through. I see a reference, Jean said. Section 9 of the manual. I have never actually seen one on the floor. Pull it, Jack said. If it is darker than my truck's engine bay, you have your culprit. Vivian's eyes had shifted to him while he spoke. There was no condescension in her gaze now, only intent interest. We will have it apart in 5, Jean said. I will call back with what we find. The line clicked. The elevator doors slid open into the lobby. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, throwing sharper reflections off the glass. They crossed the tile at a quick walk. The receptionist glanced up as they passed and straightened a little in her chair. In the parking lot, Vivian headed not toward the front row of reserved executive spaces, but toward a dark blue sedan parked off to the side. Jack followed, feeling the difference between the cool interior of the building and the warming air outside. She unlocked the sedan and they both climbed in. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and the lingering trace of some light citrus scent. The dashboard lit up and the engine started with a quiet purr when she pressed the button. Vivian pulled out of the space with a smooth turn of the wheel. I thought CEOs drove flashier cars, Jack said, watching the lot recede in the side mirror. I used to, she said. Then I realized I saw more of the inside of the plant than the hood. They joined the line of traffic leaving the industrial park, then turned toward the highway. The tires hummed over the asphalt. Jack watched the road flow under them, the familiar markers sliding by this time from a different seat. For a while they did not speak. The quiet in the car was not empty, just full of thoughts they had not yet decided to share. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He fished it out. Unknown number. He answered. Jack Jean's voice came through louder now with the plant noise a sharper backdrop. Secondary filter was black. Looked like tar. We are putting in a new one now. Prime the system before you bring it to full load, Jack said. Let it push the air out slow. We are on it, Jean said. Jack ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. Vivian's hands rested steady on the wheel, knuckles pale but not strained. So, she said, eyes on the road ahead, let us see what you can do on my home turf. Plant 2 sat low and wide on the edge of the river, a spread of metal and glass with trucks lined up at the loading bays. As they pulled into the lot, Jack could see the difference between this place and the glossy headquarters. The building here was built to work, not impress. Vivian parked near a side entrance marked Employees Only. The concrete here was stained in familiar patterns. Oil, mud, the faint white traces of salt left over from winters past. Inside, the air changed. The quiet of the sedan gave way to a layered sound that filled Jack's chest. Machinery hummed in the distance. Compressed air hissed on some cycle he could not yet place. Voices rose and fell muffled against the high ceiling. The hallway they entered was lined with safety posters and framed photographs of crews from past years. Men and women in matching shirts, some smiling wide, some stiff in front of the camera. The oldest of the photos had a younger man in them, who looked enough like Vivian for Jack to recognize her father, even without the nameplate. Vivian swiped a badge at a door with a red stripe across it. A green light clicked on, and the lock released with a soft clack. The sound shifted again when they stepped into the main floor. The ceiling rose high above them, webs of conduit and pipes running along steel beams. Rows of lights glared down bright enough to flatten the color from the concrete. The air smelled like hot metal hydraulic fluid, and something faintly metallic that always hung in places like this, as if the machines breathed it out. Line 3 stood silent. A chain of stations stretched across the floor, conveyors' bare robotic arms frozen mid-arc. The red warning lights above the line pulsed steadily. Workers in gray Heart Motors shirts clustered nearby, Not idle exactly, but in a holding pattern, waiting for orders, waiting for the machine heartbeat to come back. Closer to the main drive assembly, a knot of supervisors and engineers stood around an open panel, clipboards and tablets in hand, hard hats pushed back on foreheads. A couple of them turned as Vivian approached, their expressions tightening, then flattening into neutrality. "Status," she said. Gene, a broad-shouldered man with oil streaked on his sleeve, stepped forward. His safety glasses were pushed up on his head, leaving a faint imprint on his hair. "Secondary filter housing was clogged solid," he said. "We swapped it, brought pressures back into nominal range. System looks good on paper, but each time we spool up to full load, we get a drop and an auto shutdown." He nodded toward a nearby screen. Green bars lined the display, then dipped sharply in a recorded trace. "Primaries are clean," he went on. "Checked all valves. Still hits a wall at operational speed." "And we are at how long down now?" Vivian asked. "Just over an hour," Gene said. "We are holding the rest of the line on standby. People are getting twitchy." She glanced at Tom. He had his tablet out, numbers streaming on the screen. "We can make up some of it on overtime if we are back up soon," Tom said, not sounding convinced. "If this drags, we start missing outbound slots." The crew had noticed Jack by then. He stood a step behind Vivian's safety goggles, now hanging around his neck. A visitor badge clipped crookedly to his shirt. His shoes were still too clean for this floor. His eyes were not. He stepped closer to the open panel. "Can I listen?" he asked. Gene looked at Vivian, eyebrows raised. "He gave you the secondary filter," Vivian said. "Let him listen." Gene stepped aside. There was a flicker of skepticism in his gaze, the kind that came naturally to a man who had spent decades with machines and did not trust anyone who showed up in a tie. "Run it up to where it quits," Jack said, "but bring it up slow, not just slamming to full speed." Gene signaled to an operator at a console. The man nodded, fingers dancing over the controls. The main pump motor whined to life. Jack crouched beside the housing, one hand resting lightly on the metal fingertips just touching the surface. Vibrations tickled his skin, faint at first, then stronger as pressure built. He closed his eyes for a second and listened. The pump's pitch rose steadily, then wavered. There was a faint hitch, a stuttering note under the main whine, like a singer's voice catching on a word. "Hold it there," Jack called. "Do not push it further yet." The operator froze the controls. The red bar on the screen steadied just below the cutoff mark, threatening to climb. Jack shifted, following the line of the hydraulic pipes, with his eyes and hand. He drummed his fingers lightly along the metal, moving from junction to junction. "You changed the filter," he said. "Did you check the return line for debris? If that thing was choked for a while, anything that tried to squeeze through might be sitting where it should not." "We flushed the main run," one of the younger engineers said. The pressure differential looked normal. "Normal on the gauge does not always mean normal in the line," Jack said. "Sometimes the clog sits just far enough along to fool the sensor." He traced the pipes back to a junction box near the floor. It was tucked behind a support beam coated in a fine layer of dust and dried splatter that said no one had given it much attention in a while. He knelt, ignoring the way the concrete sucked the heat out of his legs. His hands worked at the bolts on the small access panel, the wrench fitting as comfortably as it had in his own shop, even though the metal here was newer and cleaner. When the panel came off, a sour smell hit his nose. Old fluid, burned slightly. "Well," he said, "there is your ghost." A wad of dark, half-gelled sludge sat in the bend of the line, caught like a clot in an artery. It glistened in the harsh light, thick and stubborn. "Pressure reads fine until you try to make it dance," he said. "Then this junk says no." Gene leaned down, peering over his shoulder. "I will be damned," he muttered. A couple of the crew shifted closer, drawn in despite themselves. Even the skeptical young engineer had moved nearer, the doubt on his face, now mixed with reluctant interest. "We can clear it," Gene said. "We should," Jack replied. They worked quickly. Gene barked for a tray absorbent pads, a fresh line section on standby. Jack's fingers were slick with fluid as he helped unseat the clogged piece. The sludge oozed out, hanging for a moment before dropping heavily into the tray with a wet sound. "Looks like my old coffee," Jack said. A few short laughs broke out around him, the tightness in the air easing a fraction. They replaced the fouled section, sealed it, bled the line. The smell of hydraulic fluid grew stronger, mixing with sweat and metal. "Try it again," Vivian said. Her voice cut through the murmur steady. The operator nodded, eyes flicking from her to the screen. The pump started up. Jack went back to the housing, one hand on the metal. Again the pitch climbed. This time the wobble was less pronounced. The sound smoothed out, settling into a strong, sustained note. On the display, the pressure bar rose, dipped slightly at the old treble point, then kept climbing. It moved into the target range and stayed. Red warning lights shifted to steady green. "Bring the line up," Tom said. Conveyors whirred to life in sections. Motors spun up. Robotic arms lifted and lowered in a test pattern, then began the programmed rhythm of real work. Car frames rolled forward, accepting parts moving down the line. The noise level on the plant floor rose. It was not chaotic. It was the controlled roar of a system returning to function like a heart, resuming a normal rhythm after a skipped beat. Around Jack, shoulders dropped. A few people clapped each other on the back. Someone let out a low whistle. Gene watched the screen for a full 30 seconds before allowing himself a nod. "Looks stable," he said. "We will keep an eye on temperature, but that did it." He turned to Jack. "You have not worked one of these systems before," he said. It came out as a statement. "Not this exact model," Jack said. "But a pump is a pump. It complains the same way when it cannot breathe." Gene snorted this time with respect. "Well, Miller," he said, "if you ever get tired of Rusty's, we could use another set of ears like that." Tom coughed softly. "That might be in the works," he said. Some of the workers around them had gone back to their posts, but not all. A couple of them looked at Jack with open curiosity now. He did not look like them, not exactly, but he did not look entirely like the people from upstairs either. Vivian stood a few paces back, watching the line run. From her angle, she could see both the machine and the man who had helped coax it back. The brief visitor badge on his shirt stark against the ironed blue fabric, his tie slightly askew from crouching, his hands marked by fresh fluid, the cleaner streaks where he had wiped them on a rag. She stepped forward. "That was impressive," she said. Jack looked over at her, the noise of the restarted line washing around them. "That was Tuesday afternoon," he said. The words were not arrogant. They held a simple truth. This more than the conference room was where his confidence lived. She glanced at the cluster of employees who were heading back to their stations, then at Gene, who already had his hands on a clipboard, checking off boxes as if his world made sense again. "This is what you do," she said. "It is what I have always done," he answered. "And you have been doing it in a corner shop by the highway," she said. He shrugged. "That corner shop keeps a lot of people on the road," he said. "But here you keep a lot of people employed. Different scale." She considered that. Tom checked his tablet again, then looked up. "We will need to adjust schedules," he said. "But if the line holds, we can recover most of the lost capacity. We might have to push second shift a bit." "Work it out," Vivian said. "Make sure they are compensated fairly for the extra time. I will stand behind it in the next meeting." Tom nodded, already thinking 3 steps ahead in production charts and staffing grids. Vivian turned back to Jack. "You walked into a problem you had not seen before and made it your business," she said. "You asked the right questions. You got down on the floor. That is the kind of thing my father talked about when he said he wanted this place run by people who knew what it felt like to have oil under their nails." Jack glanced at a nearby pillar. On it hung an old framed photograph. A younger version of the man from the lobby photo stood there, arms folded, sleeves rolled up, a line worker beside him, covered in grime and grinning. "Looks like he meant it," Jack said. "He did," she replied. She replied. She watched him for a moment more. "You want to go someplace quieter?" she asked. "Finish the conversation we started before the emergency alarm went off." He looked around the plant floor, at the now steadily moving line, at the faces of the workers, who had turned back to their stations, but still threw occasional glances their way. "Sure," he said. "Long as you are not taking me somewhere with marble and fancy coffee this time." She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "No promises on the coffee," she said, "but we can skip the marble." They walked back toward the side corridor together. As they stepped through the door, the sound of the plant softened behind them, turning from a shout to a muffled, steady presence like distant surf. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed. Their footsteps echoed lightly on the polished concrete, 2 distinct rhythms falling into step. They ended up in a small meeting room off the main corridor, a space meant for quick huddles rather than presentations. The table was round instead of long, and the chairs were practical instead of sleek. A whiteboard covered one wall, half filled with notes from some earlier discussion about throughput and maintenance cycles. Someone had left a marker uncapped. It had dried in place. Vivian took a seat and folded her hands on the table. The energy that had carried her across the plant floor seemed to settle, condensing into something more contained. Jack sat across from her. He could still feel the faint hum of the machines through the floor, like a cat purring in another room. "So," he said, "did I just help myself out of a job by telling your people what to do?" Her mouth curved slightly at the corner. If Gene were the sort of person who felt threatened by someone spotting a problem he missed, he would not be running maintenance, she said. "And if I wanted a manager who never got his hands dirty, I would not have asked you to come to Plant 2 with me." He let that sink in. "Is that what this is about?" he asked. You looking for a manager, or looking for a guy you can drag into emergencies? Both, she said without hesitation. We have plenty of people who can read a report. We have fewer who can walk into a mess and see the shape of the solution without asking for a slide deck first. Her gaze met his squarely. Today was informative, she said. Not just because you helped get my line back, but because it told me something about how you handle pressure. He shifted in his chair. Compliments made him feel more exposed than criticism sometimes. I was just doing what I know he said. Exactly, she replied. For a moment, they simply sat there. The room felt oddly quiet after the roar of the floor. The fluorescent light buzzed softly above them. I am not going to make you a formal offer in a break room, she said. I still have to talk to Tom and HR and a few other people who care about words in boxes. But I can tell you this. Today did not hurt you. That is good to hear, he said. I would like a chance to talk to you outside these walls, she went on. Not as CEO and candidate, but as two people who might end up tied to the same place for a while. He thought of the lobby, the glass conference room, the plant floor, the way people watched her, wherever she walked. He thought of how different she had looked, soaked in rain on the side of the freeway, and how both versions seemed to be true. Outside these walls, he repeated, You planning to show up at Rusty's with more coffee? Her eyes flickered almost amused. Rusty's looked like the sort of place where rumors grow faster than ivy, she said. Your home seems like a better option if you would be comfortable with that. The image of his trailer flashed in his mind. The tiny kitchen, the wobbly table, Lily's drawings taped to the wall, the garden patch scratching its way out of the dirt. You want to come to the park, he said. I want to see where you are coming from, she said. It is hard to judge what a change means for someone if you have never seen the starting point. He hesitated, then nodded once. Tomorrow morning, he said. Lily has school. You can catch both of us before the bus. Text me the address, she said, sliding a business card across the table. Her number was already written on the back, in blue ink, a small slant to the numbers that made them feel less like corporate contact information and more like something handed over in a different context. He slipped the card into his pocket. Deal, he said. They walked back toward the plant floor together, then split paths. She headed toward the cluster of offices that overlooked the line. He found his way to the side exit, the sounds of the factory fading behind him. When he climbed into her sedan earlier, he had felt like he was entering another world. Walking back across the lot toward his truck, he realized he was standing with one foot in each. The next morning dawned bright and sharp. The rain had rinsed the air clean. Sunlight caught on the edges of the trailers, turning the metal seams into thin lines of gold. The ground was still damp, and the small patch of garden outside Jack's place glistened. Tiny beads of water clung to the leaves of the tomato plants like clear insects. Inside, the smell of frying eggs mingled with the faint tang of dish soap. Jack stood at the stove in his t-shirt and jeans, flipping eggs in an old pan that had seen better days. Behind him, bread popped out of the toaster with a soft click. Lily sat at the table, her backpack already zipped and waiting by her feet. Her braids were somewhat straighter than usual, the result of his clumsy hands and her patient instructions. A pencil spun between her fingers as she worked through a math problem in a workbook. Do you think they have robots that do homework at Hart Motors? She asked without looking up. I hope not, he said. You would be out of a job. I am not getting paid, she pointed out. That is what you think, he said. You are getting paid in grilled cheese and bedtime stories. She considered this, then shrugged, conceding the point. There was a knock at the door. Not a heavy pounding, not the quick tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar. A measured 3-beat knock. New. Lily's eyes flicked up. Is that Mr. Carson again? She asked. I did not break his window this time. You only did that once, Jack said. He wiped his hands on a towel and went to the door. When he opened it, the sunlight outside made him squint for a second. Vivian stood on the small concrete step, a dark suit replacing yesterday's plant floor clothes. The heels of her shoes were narrow, not especially practical for the slightly uneven gravel path, but she stood steady. The early light picked up the faint copper threads in her hair. Behind her, the trailer park stretched out in rows. A few neighbors were out already smoking on steps or loading kids into cars. A couple of them had turned their heads to look. The sight of a woman dressed like she was heading to a courtroom instead of a factory drew attention. Good morning, she said. Jack stepped outside, easing the door mostly shut behind him, out of habit. You found it, he said. The directions were clear, she said. Big oak tree blue mailbox with a dent third trailer on the left. You should write directions for the Maps app. He glanced past her at the oak tree, its leaves moving gently in the breeze. Somebody had tied a faded red ribbon around one of the lower branches years ago. The ribbon was still there, bleached pink by the sun. Do you want to come in? He asked. If that is all right, she said. There was no assumption in her tone. He opened the door wider. The living room and kitchen were one space. Vivian took it in with a quick, efficient sweep of her eye. Ishsaz. The couch with the worn armrest where Jack always sat. The television that sometimes fuzzed out when the weather turned. The wall with Lily's drawings, a patchwork of crayon sons' houses, and more recently lumpy attempts at cars and machines. The table held 3 plates, 2 set with toast and eggs, 1 still empty. Smells good, she said. Cheap eggs make the best breakfast, Jack said. That is what Lily says. Lily is right, Lily said from the table. Jack glanced at his daughter. Lily, he said, this is Vivian. She works at Hart Motors. Vivian moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. We have met, sort of, Vivian said. I am the lady with the flat tire. Lily's brows went up. Really, she said. Dad left a big fancy interview to fix your car. Lily. Jack said, a warning edge in his voice. Vivian lifted a hand slightly. It is all right, she said. He did. And I was very glad he did. Lily studied her a moment, then nodded as if checking off a box. You look different, she said. Less wet. Dry is my preferred look, Vivian said. That got a small smile from Lily. You want some breakfast, Lily asked. We have extra eggs. Dad always makes too many. Vivian glanced at Jack. I do not want to intrude, she said. You are already here, he said. Might as well feed you. She slipped off her jacket and draped it over the back of a chair before sitting down. The blouse beneath was simple and white. Without the jacket, she looked less like a portrait in a lobby and more like someone who might get caught in a grease stain if she was not careful. Jack added another plate to the table, sliding eggs and toast onto it. The 3 of them ate together. For a while, the only sounds were forks on plates and the ticking of the clock above the stove. So, Lily said between bites, are you Dad's boss now? Jack almost choked on his coffee. Vivian took a sip of hers, then set the cup down. Not yet, she said, but we are talking about it. Do you want to be? Lily asked Jack. He looked at his daughter. Her face was open earnest, but there was caution there too. She knew what a change could mean. New schedules, new expectations, new chances for things to fall apart. I am thinking about it, he said. It would be different. Different can be good, or just different. Lily absorbed that with a small frown of concentration. Mom always said you deserve good things, she said to Vivian, as if presenting a fact that might have been overlooked. Vivian's gaze softened. She sounds like she was smart, Vivian said. She was, Lily answered. She got sick, though. Silence pressed in for a heartbeat. Jack's fork paused above his plate. I am sorry, Vivian said quietly. Lily shrugged one shoulder a little stiffly. It was not your fault, she said. You just had a flat tire. Jack cleared his throat gently. Why do you not grab your backpack? He said to Lily. Bus will be here soon. She hopped off her chair and went to the hook by the door, shouldering her pack. As she passed Vivian, she paused. If you give him a job, Lily said, make sure he still has time to help me with my science projects. I will do my best, Vivian said. That is all grown-ups can do, Lily replied. Then she leaned in and gave her father a quick hug. After a second's hesitation, she stepped toward Vivian and did the same, arms wrapping around her in a brief squeeze. Vivian froze for a fraction of a second, caught off guard, then her hands came up lightly to return the embrace. Bye, Lily said. She darted out the door. Jack followed, standing on the step with her, while they watched for the yellow bus. Vivian remained just inside, a silent presence in the doorway. The bus rumbled up the street a minute later. Lily climbed aboard, turning to wave from the steps. Jack lifted his hand in return. The bus pulled away, wheels hissing on the damp pavement. The park grew quieter. A dog barked somewhere down the row. A car door slammed. Then it was just the breeze and the faint hum of the highway in the distance. Jack stepped back inside. He closed the door gently. Without Lily, the trailer felt a little larger and a little emptier. Vivian had moved to the small window by the table, looking out at the garden patch. The dirt was dark from the rain, the young plants standing straight. You did this with her? She asked. She likes watching things grow, he said. Says it makes the place look less temporary. Vivian nodded slowly. It feels honest, she said. Everything here does. He leaned against the edge of the counter, crossing his arms loosely. You did not come all the way out to the park to talk about my tomatoes, he said. No, she agreed. She turned from the window to face him fully. 3 months ago, my father died, she said. He built Hart Motors from a 2-bay shop to the company you walked into yesterday. He used to say the company lived or died on the way it treated the people who clocked in every day, not the ones whose names were on the letterhead. Jack listened, saying nothing. After he passed, the board moved fast. She continued. They saw an opportunity to do what they had wanted for years. Cut benefits, trim headcount, Squeeze more out of the margins, all the things that look good on a quarterly report and feel bad on a factory floor. Her gaze drifted briefly to the photo of Lily taped to the wall, a crayon sun drawn in the corner. The morning I blew that tire on I-75, she said I was on my way to sign off on a plan that would have done just that. Clean, efficient, and completely detached from the actual lives under this roof. She looked back at him. Then I ended up standing in the rain, waiting for a stranger to decide if my inconvenience was worth his opportunity, she said. You chose the stranger, you missed the interview. You went back to this place to your daughter, without a job offer, and without making a speech about how noble you were. Jack shifted his weight. The floor under his feet creaked faintly. You reminded me of the men and women my father talked about when he tried to keep this place human, she said. And yesterday in Plant 2, you reminded me why he refused to let the people with clean desks make all the decisions. She took a breath, not deep but steady. I want you at Hart Motors, she said, not as a token hire, not as a favor. As operations manager at Plant 2, I need someone who can hear what a machine is saying and who cares what the people standing next to it are going through. The words hung in the small kitchen. They seemed almost too large for the space bumping up against the low ceiling and the narrow walls. Jack felt his heartbeat in his throat. For a split second, he imagined the plant floor again, the lines running, the people moving, the sense of purpose humming through the air. Then the image shifted to Lily's face, the garden patch Rusty leaning in the office doorway with a grease rag in his hand. He set his coffee mug down carefully, the ceramic clinking softly against the counter. Vivian, he said, that is a big ask. I know, she replied. I am not asking you for an answer this second. I am asking you to really consider it. His eyes moved around the room, taking in each familiar detail, as if seeing it both as it was and as something that might soon be part of a different story. If I do this, he said quietly, more to himself than to her, it is not just my life that shifts. I understand that, she said. That is why I came here first. I needed to see who else is in the room, even when I am not. He nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling over him like a coat he was just trying on. Then I will think, he said, and we will talk again. For a while after the words left his mouth, neither of them moved. Vivian stood near the table, her hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. Outside the small window, a breeze stirred the leaves on the oak tree and set the faded ribbon trembling. Jack picked his mug up again, then set it down without drinking. There is one thing, he said at last. Her posture sharpened a little, but she did not interrupt. If I say yes, he went on, I am not walking out on Rusty the next morning. He gave me a job when no one else would touch a guy who had been out of work that long. I owe him more than a note on the counter. How much time would you need? She asked. 2 weeks, Jack said. I can train whoever replaces me, make sure I am not leaving him with a mess. After that, I am yours during work hours, as long as you will have me. Relief flickered across her features, mingling with something like approval. That is reasonable, she said. Rusty is not the only one who benefits from you honoring your commitments. He nodded once. And the second thing he said has nothing to do with filters or production charts. She tilted her head, waiting. If I'm going to work for you, he said, if you are going to be the person who changes my daughter's life by changing mine, I want you to sit at our table at least once. No offices, no conference rooms, just you, me, Lily, and whatever I can cook that does not come out of a box. She deserves to see the face that goes with the name on my paycheck. And you deserve to see who you are really hiring beyond a resume and a plant floor. A small silence followed that. It was not uncomfortable, but it carried weight. You are inviting the CEO of Hart Motors to dinner in a trailer, she said. I am inviting Vivian to dinner at my house, he replied. Something in her expression eased. The professional mask did not disappear, but it slipped enough to show the person underneath. I would like that, she said. Let me know which night, and I will bring dessert that will ruin both of you for grocery store cake. He smiled, a real one this time. You have a deal, he said. They talked for a few more minutes about practicalities, about paperwork that would go into motion if he agreed. When she left, stepping back out into the sunlight, Jack watched her walk down the small path between trailers' heels, careful on the uneven ground. A few neighbors pretended not to stare as she passed. After she drove away, the quiet in the trailer felt different. Not heavier exactly, just full of possibilities he had not had to think about the day before. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, he sat at the table with a pad of paper and the stub of a pencil. Numbers filled the page. Current pay, potential pay, gas costs, school supplies. The edge of a future that did not involve choosing between a new pair of shoes for Lily and fixing a leak in the roof. The next morning, he walked into Rusty's office and closed the door behind him. Rusty looked up from a stack of invoices pen, chewing on his lower lip. "You look like a man who just swallowed a bolt," Rusty said. "You all right?" Jack sat down in the chair across from him. The talk he had rehearsed on the way over slipped around in his head, the words rearranging themselves. "Hart Motors offered me a job," he said. "Operations manager at Plant 2. Rusty's eyebrows rose. He leaned back, chair creaking. "That is not nothing," he said. "No," Jack said. "It is not." Rusty studied him for a moment. "You came in here to quit," he said, "but you are not doing a victory lap. That is a good sign." "I do not want to leave you hanging," Jack said. "You took me on when things were rough. I owe you more than just dropping a shirt on the hook and walking out." Rusty grunted, then tossed the pen on the desk. 2 weeks, Jack said. "I train whoever you hire. I write down everything I know that I have not had time to say out loud. I help set them up right." Rusty scratched his beard. "You think some kid you train for 14 days is going to replace you?" he asked. "No," Jack said. "I think they might be able to survive it if they listen." Rusty huffed. "You would be an idiot not to take that job," he said. "And I did not hire you because you are an idiot." Jack let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "I still hate losing you," Rusty added. "But I would hate it more if you stayed here because you thought I could not manage a few mufflers on my own." He opened a drawer and rummaged inside, coming up with a small, battered object. He tossed it across the desk. Jack caught it automatically. It was an old wrench, the chrome finish worn and pitted. The brand name on the handle had been rubbed nearly smooth by years of use, but the weight of it was solid and familiar. "Found that my first year in this place," Rusty said. "Some guy left it behind. It has been in that drawer ever since. I figure you might actually put it to work." Jack turned the wrench over in his hands. It felt good there. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Do not get sentimental on me," Rusty said. "I am not dying. I am just going to have to learn to yell at a different mechanic." The 2 weeks moved faster than he expected. Rusty hired a young tech from a few towns over, a guy named Marcus, who still smelled faintly of school, and carried his socket set in a brand new plastic case. Jack taught him how to listen to engines that sounded fine until they were not, how to feel for a vibration that did not match the revs, how to tell when a customer was more scared than angry. He wrote notes on a yellow pad, knots of wisdom that would not show up in any manual, things his father had told him, things he had learned the hard way. Marcus read them with careful attention, lips moving along with the words as if he were memorizing them. Each night Jack came home a little more tired and a little more sure. During that stretch, one evening fell open for dinner. Vivian pulled up in the same dark sedan this time, carrying a white box from a bakery in the city. Inside, a chocolate cake sat under a sheen of glossy frosting, decorated with a simple swirl that looked too deliberate to be accidental. They ate at the small table, Lily asking questions about robots and assembly lines, about whether there were vending machines at Hart Motors and if the people there ever got bored. Vivian answered as best she could, sometimes turning the questions back, sometimes letting the unknowns just be unknowns. After dessert, once Lily was in bed, Jack and Vivian sat on the front steps with their coffee mugs, watching the streetlight flicker at the corner. The conversation moved in and out of work, picking up pieces of who they had been before Hart Motors entered the picture. When she left, the air felt cooler. Jack stood under the porch light for a long moment, wrench in his pocket, the smell of chocolate still clinging to the kitchen. 2 weeks later, on a Monday that came sooner than he thought it would, he parked his truck in the Hart Motors lot again. This time, he left the toolbox in the passenger seat only long enough to lock the door. He pulled it out and carried it with him, hand wrapped around the old handle. In his other hand, he held a new black briefcase Vivian had insisted he needed. It still felt foreign, its surface too smooth, its corners too sharp. He wore a white shirt. Lily had chosen small silver dots scattered across the fabric, in a pattern she claimed looked important, but not boring. His tie was straighter. His shoes were the same pair, polished as much as leather would allow. Walking across the lot, he was aware of the weight in each hand. Old life, new one, both very real. Inside, the receptionist greeted him by name. She gave him a different badge, this time one that said Operations in small letters under his own. Janet met him in the lobby, her tablet already out. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Miller," she said. "We have some paperwork and orientation to get through this morning, but Tom wants you on the floor as soon as we can get you there." The morning blurred at the edges. Forms, policy documents, safety videos. A photo taken for his ID, the flash leaving a lingering afterimage. By late morning, he stood with Tom on an elevated walkway overlooking Plant 2. Below, the lines ran. Workers moved along them. The air was loud and hot. From up here, he could see the rhythm of the plant as a whole, not just the small patch he had known as a visitor. Tom crossed his arms, looking down with him. "You are going to be spending most of your time down there, not up here," Tom said. "I hope you know that." "That is the idea," Jack said. "Good," Tom replied, "because some of the folks on that floor have had managers who only came down when something was on fire, literally or figuratively. It will take time for them to believe you are different." "I can live with that," Jack said. "I do my best work in coveralls anyway." Tom gave him a sideways look, then nodded toward the stairs. "Come on," he said. "Let me introduce you the official way." They walked down together and stepped onto the plant floor. The sound wrapped around them, familiar now to Jack, but still a rush. Jean met them halfway. "So it is official," Jean said. "We are stuck with you." "Looks that way," Jack said. A small group of line workers had drifted closer, boots scuffing on the concrete. Some of them had been there the day of the filter and the clogged line. Some had only heard about it in break room conversations. Tom raised his voice just enough to carry. "Everyone," he said, "this is Jack Miller, our new operations manager. Some of you met him under less than ideal circumstances." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the group. "He will be working with us to keep this place running and hopefully make it a little better to work in." Jack was not a speechmaker by nature. He kept it short. "I am not here to tell you how to do jobs you have been doing longer than I have been walking these floors," he said. "I am here to listen when something does not work and to help fight for what you need to fix it. Machine schedules the stuff the folks upstairs do not always see. I will make mistakes. You can tell me when I do. Preferably before the line shuts down." A few smiles, a couple of skeptical looks, mostly open curiosity. As the group broke apart and people went back to their stations, Jack lingered near one of the conveyors. He reached out and laid his hand on the frame for a second, feeling the vibration. The plant did not know him yet. He did not know all of it, but the rhythm under his palm felt like something he could learn to understand. 6 months slid by, measured less in calendar pages than in shifts and production runs. The days in Plant 2 fell into a rhythm. Mornings started with boots on concrete, the smell of coffee from chipped mugs, the clatter of metal as lines came to life. Jack spent more time in steel-toed shoes than polished ones, more time with his sleeves rolled up than buttoned at the cuffs. He learned names, not just the ones printed on badges, but the nicknames and stories that went with them. Ramon on line 1 could hear a bearing going bad from 20 feet away. Tia in quality control knew when someone was having a rough day by the way they stacked finished parts. Malik had a scar on his forearm from an accident 15 years ago that he still talked about as a reminder rather than a complaint. He learned the quirks of the machines too. Line 3 liked a slightly slower ramp-up in the first hour of a cold morning. A certain press in the stamping area rattled its guard whenever humidity climbed too high. The main conveyor on the north side sometimes made a sound like a loose drawer when the chain needed attention. He listened. He made small adjustments. He pushed for maintenance before breakdowns. He took notes on a worn notebook that lived in his pocket, the pages filled with sketches and short phrases only he could fully interpret. Little things shifted. A bottleneck at one station eased after he convinced scheduling to balance the load differently. The break room, which had once felt like a place where people sat in separate corners, began to hum with conversations that rolled past shift lines and job titles. A suggestion board he put up near the time clock filled with handwritten notes, some serious, some joking. He took the serious ones back, and when changes resulted, people noticed. On paper, the changes showed up as numbers. Rework percentages dipped. Output climbed a few small notches, then held steady. Safety incidents dropped. Surveys that had once been filled out with shrugs and checked boxes began to show comments in the margins. In the glass building, those numbers gathered on screens and charts. One afternoon, Jack found himself again in a conference room at headquarters. This one was larger than the one where he had first met Vivian as CEO. The table here was long, glossy, dotted with folders and small bottles of water. The walls held framed photos of the company at different stages of its life, from the 2-bay garage to the first plant opening to the ribbon cutting of the current headquarters. Members of the board sat around the table in tailored suits and dresses. They carried themselves like people accustomed to viewing the world from a certain height. Vivian stood at the head of the table. The light from the windows behind her outlined her shoulders and turned the edges of her hair into a soft halo. A large screen displayed a neat slide full of graphs and percentages. Plant 2 has exceeded production targets for the 3rd consecutive quarter, she said. Quality metrics are up 20% compared to last year. Efficiency has improved 15%. And employee satisfaction scores are the highest we have on record for that facility. There was a murmur around the table. The board members focused on different parts of the slide. Some tracked the upward lines with their eyes, others zeroed in on the percentages. "This puts us in a strong position with the Kincaid contract," one of them said. He was an older man with silver hair and a watch that looked like it had never seen a scratch. Vivian clicked to the next slide. "Kincaid has agreed to a 5-year supply agreement at increased volume," she said. "They cited our consistency over the last 6 months and our responsiveness during the trial period as key factors in their decision." A woman in a dark green suit nodded. "That contract alone secures a significant portion of our projected revenue," she said. "It also gives us leverage in related markets." Another board member, younger with sharp glasses, tapped a pen against the table. "And you achieved this without the headcount reduction we discussed last year," he said. Vivian met his gaze. "We achieved this because we did not cut people who were already stretched thin," she said. "We invested in their input. We removed friction points. We allowed maintenance to correct underlying issues instead of patching symptoms." She did not say Jack's name. She did not need to. He sat a little further down the table, not at the head, but not at the far end either. From his seat, he could see both the slides and the reflections of the room in the glass wall. He watched the back and forth, the questions about projected margins and risk exposure. Vivian answered each one with specifics, her tone respectful but firm. The board members listened. Some nodded. One or two pursed their lips, more cautious, less easily swayed. In the end, the numbers spoke in a language everyone in the room understood. When the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped lightly on the floor. People gathered their papers and devices, offering polite congratulations, some genuine, some obligatory. A few of them stopped near Jack as they made their way out. "Good work at Plant 2, one said. "We have heard your name more often lately," another added. He thanked them, keeping his responses brief. The room still felt foreign in certain ways. The suit he wore fit better than his old shirts, but the collar still reminded him of a leash if he tugged at it too much. After most of the board had filtered out, the room quieted. Daylight slanted in a little lower through the windows, throwing longer shadows across the table. Vivian walked over to where Jack stood. "You handled that well," she said. "I sat and tried not to knock over a water bottle," he said. "You handled it well." She shook her head slightly. They needed to see the results, she said, but the results came from work you and your people did. Do not undersell that. "I did not turn a wrench on any of those lines this month," he said. "You made sure the right wrenches turned at the right time," she replied. "You listened when someone said a machine sounded wrong instead of waiting for it to break." He did not argue. There was truth in what she said, even if his instinct was still to deflect. "Are you heading straight home after this?" she asked. "That is the plan," he said. "Lily has a science quiz tomorrow. She will want to quiz me before she takes it." "Good," Vivian said. She picked up a small folder from the table and tucked it under her arm. "Do you have room for cake?" she asked. He frowned, caught off guard. "Cake," he said. "You will see," she said. In the end, he did not see it until she stepped onto the trailer's front step that evening. The sun was sliding down, turning the sky a soft orange, and the edges of the trailers amber. The air held a trace of the day's heat, but the promise of cooler night crept in around it. Vivian stood there in dark jeans and a simple blouse, a canvas jacket over one arm. In her hands, she balanced a white bakery box, the kind that tied closed with thin twine. Lily was the one who opened the door. Her eyes widened. "Is that for us?" she asked, gaze fixed on the box. "If your dad agrees to share," Vivian said. "He does," Lily said without looking back. "Come in." Jack at the sink rinsing a pan turned when he heard Vivian's voice. He dried his hands on a dish towel. "You did not have to do that," he said, nodding at the box. "Kincaid signed today," she said. "Plant 2 is a big part of why." That felt like a shareable moment. She set the box on the table and untied the twine. Inside, a chocolate cake waited, the frosting glossy, the edges decorated with a ring of shaved chocolate curls. The smell of cocoa and sugar wafted up as she lifted the lid fully. Lily leaned in, inhaling. "This is not from the grocery store," she declared. "No," Vivian said. "This is from a place where they charge you extra for using real cream and then apologize for it." They ate dinner first, something simple that Jack had thrown together. The cake sat in the middle of the table, like a small, patient celebration. When he finally cut into it, the knife slid through with almost no resistance. The slices towered on the plate's layers of dark cake and lighter filling. Lily took one bite and let out a small, involuntary sound of appreciation. "This is what rich tastes like," she said. Jack chuckled. "Do not get used to it," he said. "Most of the time we are going to be rich in frozen pizza." Lily swallowed and turned to Vivian. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" Vivian said. "Being rich," Lily said. Before you started coming to places like this and listening to people talk about filters. Jack opened his mouth to intervene, then closed it. He watched Vivian instead. Her fork rested lightly on the plate. She looked around the small kitchen, the worn table, the collection of different chairs, the drawings on the walls, the smudge of flour on the counter from where Lily had helped with dinner. For a long time, Vivian said slowly, I thought rich meant having more money than I could ever spend. It meant never worrying about bills or repairs or medical things. It meant walking into any store and not looking at price tags. She took a small bite of cake chewed swallowed. I had all of that, she continued. But most nights I ate alone standing over a sink or at a desk. People laughed at my jokes because they thought they were supposed to. If something went wrong, no one told me the truth, until it was large enough to threaten them too. I was surrounded by people, but I could not always tell which ones knew me and which ones just knew my title. She glanced at Jack, then at Lily. Lately, she said, I have been in rooms where the chairs do not match, and the coffee is too strong or too weak, and people still tell me when I am wrong. I eat cake that tastes better because I am not the only one holding a fork. I still have money, that has not changed. But this feels closer to rich than anything I had before. Lily considered this, then nodded in the serious way she had when something made sense. So friendship is worth more than money, she said. I think friendship and work that matters, and people who say things you do not want to hear when you need to hear them, are worth a lot, Vivian said. And chocolate cake is worth more when you share it. They ate in companionable quiet for a few minutes. The cake disappeared slice by slice, leaving a scattering of crumbs on the cardboard base and a smudge of frosting at the corner of Lily's mouth. Later, when the plates were rinsed and stacked, and Lily had gone to her room with a book about planets, Jack and Vivian stepped outside. The night had settled fully now. Stars pricked through the dim spill of city light. A few porch bulbs glowed up and down the row, small pockets of yellow in the blue dark. They sat on the front steps, the wood warm from the day's sun. From here, Jack could see the faint silhouette of the garden plants a little taller than they had been 6 months ago. The dirt between them held the soft shine of recent watering. You did good work today, he said. So did you, she replied. He shook his head. I sat in a room and watched you make people who have never been near a line care about one, he said. That is not nothing. They fell into an easy quiet. The trailer park sounds floated around them. A television down the way. A dog barking twice and then stopping. The hum of the highway distant and steady. In the window behind them, light spilled from Lily's room. Her shadow moved once across the curtain, a small figure turning a page. Jack glanced up at the sky. 6 months ago, I was hoping my truck would not die before the next shift at Rusty's, he said. Now my kid is talking about planets and engineers and asking if robots get bored. She keeps that up, Vivian said, and I will have to start grooming her for my job. Careful, Jack said. She will take you up on that. Good, Vivian said. I would like to see her try. A car turned in at the far end of the park, headlights sliding across the rows of metal walls. The light passed over them and moved on, leaving the steps in soft shadow again. For a while they sat without speaking, mugs, warm in their hands, listening to the small noises of the neighborhood, settling in for the night. Vivian tilted her head back, looking up. There are never this many stars over my apartment, she said. Too many lights, too much glass. Here we only have one flickering street lamp doing its best, Jack said. The rest is all sky. She let out a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. Can I ask you something? She said after a moment. You can try, he replied. Iggy replied. If that morning on I-75 had gone differently, she said, if you had kept driving and made it to the interview on time, do you ever think about what that would have looked like? He thought about it. The question itself felt like something he had turned over in his hands before testing its weight. Sometimes he admitted, a little, and she prompted. He watched a thin cloud drift across one of the brighter stars, then move on. My dad used to have a saying, Jack said. He told me regretting a kind act is like apologizing for being human. Every time you help somebody, you are making a bet that the world is worth the trouble. Even if nothing good comes back your way, you still know the kind of person you decided to be. The words came out slower than usual, not because he did not know them, but because they mattered enough to place carefully. Vivian listened without shifting, her face turned toward him now, instead of the sky. So, no, he added. I do not spend much time building the version of my life where I drove past you. I saw you standing there. That is the version I got. Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Your father sounds like he was a smart man, she said. He was stubborn, Jack said. The smart kind. The kind that does not feel smart until much later. Would he have liked me? She asked. Jack took a breath, then answered without hedging. I think he would have liked the woman who walked into Plant 2 and told the board to keep their hands off the benefits long enough to see what the right kind of change could do, he said. I think he would have liked the woman who shows up in a trailer park with cake and listens to a 9-year-old talk about robots. She looked away for a second, blinking once. That is a version of myself I am still getting to know, she said quietly. Looks pretty solid from here, he said. A small smile tugged at her mouth. When she stood to leave, she paused at the bottom of the steps. Jack, she said, turning back. Thank you. For the tire, for the line, for not pretending to be someone else when it might have been easier. You are the one who wanted to see who I am when nobody is looking, he said. Sometimes you get what you ask for. Her smile warmed, then she walked to her car. The engine started with its familiar quiet sound. He watched the taillights shrink along the row until they disappeared around the bend. Inside the trailer, Lily's light was out. The house was a handful of soft shapes in the dark. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment in the small kitchen. On the counter, the empty cake box smelled faintly of chocolate and sugar. Beside it, a folded napkin held a pattern of crumbs and the outline of a fork. Time moved forward in fits and starts after that. Months blurred into each other at Heart Motors, not because nothing happened, but because the days stacked up, so that looking back, the whole thing looked like a single long movement. In his office at Plant 2, Jack had made small changes. The first thing he did was drag the standard issue metal desk a little away from the wall so he could see both the floor and his computer screen without turning completely around. The second thing he did was set 2 objects right next to each other on the surface. On the left sat the new black briefcase, edges still sharp, seams still crisp. On the right sat his father's red toolbox, paint-chipped, sticker-faded handle, polished by years of grip. The combination made visitors smile sometimes. It made a few people raise their brows. It made sense to him. Between them, propped against the wall, he taped a photo of Lily grinning, with a gap where one of her front teeth had been. Underneath, in kid handwriting, she had written, "Plant 2 is cool" in blue marker. Next to the photo was a business card, not one of his, Lily's. The card had her name printed in a simple, bold font. Under it, in Vivian's neat script, were 3 words, "Future engineer definitely." Lily kept a second copy of that card taped near her desk at home. Jack had watched her look at it more than once when she was supposed to be doing homework, the way someone might look at a map before starting a long trip. At the plant, the days filled with choices. Some of them were small, like approving a maintenance window before something failed. Some of them were larger, like standing with Jean in a meeting and insisting that a planned shortcut would cost more than it saved. He did not win every argument. That was not how it worked. But he won enough of the ones that mattered. Sometimes late in the afternoon, he would stand by the railing on the mezzanine and place both hands on the metal, feeling the faint vibration of the building through his palms. Below him, workers moved along the lines, their bodies following a pattern that had become a second language. He had learned to recognize some of them by their walk, by the way they carried a bin by the set of their shoulders on a good day versus a hard one. On those days, he would remember standing in the rain beside the Tesla, his hands numb, the tire slick under his fingers. The memory did not come with a sense of loss anymore. It felt more like a hinge, a point the door of his life had swung on without him knowing it at the time. Evenings at the trailer shifted in quieter ways. Lily's homework grew more complicated. She brought home assignments that involved bridges made from toothpicks and a model of the solar system, crafted out of painted foam balls. Jack found himself reading instructions about torque and force, alongside her, watching her eyes light up when something clicked. Vivian did not come by every week. Her schedule was still heavy, and there were nights when she was on calls with suppliers halfway across the world, while Jack and Lily ate spaghetti at the table. But she came often enough that the sight of her sedan in the lot stopped making neighbors pause quite so much. When she did come, she kicked off her shoes at the door and kept her jacket over the back of a chair, where it would inevitably pick up the smell of whatever had been cooked that night. She listened to Lily explain her latest project with the same focus she had in board meetings. She sometimes came from the plant, a faint smudge of something on her sleeve, giving away that she had been on the floor. One cool night in early autumn, the 3 of them stood in the small yard beside the garden patch. Lily had a cardboard tube she had turned into a pretend telescope. She aimed it at the sky and narrated her discoveries in a serious voice. "Jupiter lives over our trailer now," she declared. "The big star near the oak tree is definitely Mars." Jack sat on an overturned crate, hands loosely clasped between his knees. Vivian stood nearby, her hands in the pockets of a sweater instead of a blazer. The air smelled like damp earth and the faint, dry scent of leaves that would soon turn. "Do you ever miss the tow truck?" Vivian asked quietly. "I miss the guy who drove it," Jack said. "But he got an upgrade. The truck would not fit in the employee lot anyway." She smiled. "And this," she said, nodding toward the plant in the distance, its roof barely visible beyond the trees, "feels all right. Most days," he said, "it feels like a place where what I know actually does something for, more than just the person who walks through the door with a broken belt." Lily lowered her cardboard telescope. "Dad," she said, "do you think I could build better robots than the ones at your work?" "I think you are going to make them nervous," he said. She grinned and went back to her sky survey. As the evening deepened, the plant lights far away began to glow more distinctly, a cluster of white against the dark. Closer, the trailers lit up one by one small rectangles of yellow at windows and open doors. Jack watched Vivian study the scene. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That this is what my father wanted Hart Motors to be," she said. "Not just the big building with the logo, but all the little lights it keeps on in places like this." He did not answer, but the way his jaw relaxed said enough. Later that night, after Vivian had driven home, and Lily had finally fallen asleep with a wrench-shaped pencil in her hand, Jack sat alone at the table. The house was quiet. The only sound was the low buzz of the refrigerator and the far-off hum of the highway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his hands, turning them over under the light. There were scars along the knuckles, fine lines from sharp edges and slipped grips. Fresh calluses had formed in places the softer office work had not reached. A faint stain of oil still clung near the base of one thumb, caught in the pattern of his skin. He flexed his fingers once, then let them rest on the table. In the morning, those same hands would pick up a coffee mug, adjust a tie, snap a briefcase closed, lift a toolbox, and if Lily had her way, help glue foam planets to a string. The sky outside the window held a thin slice of moon and a scattering of stars. The light inside reached only so far, but it reached enough. Jack sat there a little longer, then turned off the switch and walked down the short hall toward his room, leaving the small house in the quiet company of its own heartbeat. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.